It cannot be that a country's geographical location or income level or army determines who has a voice and who is spoken down to. And it basically means that there should be no bullying of one nation by another nation. We are all equal.
The wins over South Africa carried a strange tension, one that diplomats could sense before the public ever understood. In Pretoria, inside the polished marble halls of the Union buildings, a storm was gathering, and its epicenter was a bold decision about to shake the foundations of global politics. For decades, many African nations had tiptoed around the power and influence of the United States government, careful not to provoke economic retaliation or diplomatic pressure. But in 2025, the world had changed and South Africa was no longer willing to bend to anyone, least of all to the newly aggressive posture of the U.S. president, whose administration had taken a hard stance against any African nation cooperating with rival global powers. The trigger was simple, yet explosive, a groundbreaking trilateral partnership between South Africa, China, and Russia focused on infrastructure, military modernization, and BRICS economic integration. The agreements promised independence, technological advancement, and security resilience for South Africa. But Washington saw it differently. To them, it was defiance. To Africa, it was a declaration of sovereignty. And that was only the beginning. The first shock came when the U.S. State Department, acting under direct instruction from the U.S. President, sent a strongly worded communique threatening economic sanctions and the withdrawal of certain trade privileges under AGOA, the lifeline many African exporters depended on. South Africa's foreign minister read the document twice in silence, then calmly folded it and placed it on the table. "This is an attempt at coercion," she said. "And coercion is not diplomacy." The cabinet agreed unanimously. For the first time since the end of apartheid, South Africa felt the weight of its own strength. With vast mineral wealth, growing technological capacity, and strategic influence through BRICS, it was no longer the junior partner the West had once assumed. Pretoria prepared its response. Within 2 days, a single-page statement was delivered to Washington. South Africa will not alter its sovereign partnerships at the instruction of any foreign leader. We welcome friendship, but we reject intimidation. The global stage froze. Markets dipped. Analysts panicked. Newsrooms exploded with headlines. And then the shockwaves began. The African Union threw its full support behind South Africa, calling the U.S. threats an outdated colonial tactic with no place in modern geopolitics. Nations like Nigeria, Ethiopia, and Tanzania issued statements applauding Pretoria's stance. But the most unexpected reaction came from Kenya, historically a close ally of the West. Its foreign minister declared, "No African state should be punished for choosing development partners that align with its national interest. We stand with South Africa." International observers were stunned. Africa was speaking not as fragmented nations, but as a unified geopolitical force, a voice powerful enough to challenge even the strongest global players. The U.S. president, under pressure from domestic critics, doubled down. He accused South Africa of inviting instability and undermining democratic partnerships. But the more he spoke, the more Africa rallied. Pretoria's refusal had ignited something much bigger than one diplomatic dispute. Political commentators called it the rebirth of African self-determination. Youth groups marched in support across Johannesburg, Lagos, Addis Ababa, and Nairobi. Even nations previously hesitant to clash with Western powers voiced support. The global reaction was, indeed, shocking. The next week delivered the biggest surprise yet. A coalition of African states, economists, and energy experts announced a new strategy to reduce reliance on Western financial systems, diversify trade partners, and strengthen continental industrialization. Major African banks began forming parallel systems to SWIFT. Investment from Asia doubled. Russian and Chinese delegations arrived in Africa weekly, and Europe watched with growing anxiety. But Washington was now under heavy scrutiny. Commentators asked why the president had provoked such a dramatic geopolitical shift. Others questioned the wisdom of alienating the fastest-growing economic region in the world. In an ironic twist, the U.S. president had accelerated exactly what he had tried to prevent: Africa's rise as a multipolar powerhouse beyond Western influence. South Africa's refusal had become a symbol, one that echoed from the Sahara to the Indian Ocean. And in that moment, Africa realized something profound. They did not need permission to stand tall.
As the leaders of the G20, we will keep fast to our solemn pledge to leave no person, no community, and no country behind. The time has come for South Africa to take up its rightful and responsible place in the community of nations. As a founding member of the G20, South Africa has sought to ensure that the development priorities of the Global South and the African continent find expression firmly and permanently on the agenda of the G20. As this is the first G20 Leader Summit to be held in Africa, it carries the hopes and must reflect the aspirations of the people of this continent and of the world. This G20 Leader Summit has a responsibility not to allow the integrity and the credibility of the G20 to be weakened. We thank all delegations that have worked together with us in good faith to produce a worthy G20 outcome document.
The early morning breeze drifted across Pretoria like a whispered warning. South Africa was awake before dawn, not because of fear, but because of resolve. The speech delivered the previous night had already echoed beyond the continent, shattering diplomatic norms and rewriting the narrative of global power. South Africa had stood its ground, defying pressure from Washington, and Africa felt the tremor. At the Union buildings, tension and pride coexisted in the same breath. Advisors moved briskly through the hallways, carrying encrypted tablets, draft communiques, and intelligence reports. The South African president, calm but firm, had convened an emergency strategy session for ministers, military chiefs, and economic advisors. Outside, reporters from every major international network had gathered like hunters waiting for the next move. Inside the strategy room, Defense Minister Koza tapped the table gently. Our airspace has seen increased surveillance drones over the last 48 hours. They're not here by accident. The president nodded. I expected as much. When a nation refuses to bow, the world tests its resolve. Foreign Minister Naledi shifted forward. Global reaction is split. Africa is applauding. Asia is cautious but supportive. Latin America sees us as a symbol. But the West, they're shocked. They didn't think South Africa would take this boldest stand. The president didn't smile, but there was a spark of determination in the eyes. Then it means we are doing something right. Meanwhile, in Washington, the mood was turbulent. Military analysts, policy hawks, and intelligence operatives filled the Situation Room. The U.S. president sat quietly listening as the National Security Advisor replayed South Africa's televised address. This is more than defiance, the advisor warned. This is influence. If Africa begins acting with unified strategic independence, global power projection in the entire region could shift. A general leaned forward. We underestimated how assertive Pretoria would become. We assumed economic leverage would pressure them. We miscalculated. Another advisor added, their alliances are evolving. They're coordinating with continental blocs, new financial coalitions, and emerging defense partners. It's not the Africa of 1990 or 2000. It's a new front. Back in Africa, the people felt an awakening. From Lagos to Harare, Nairobi to Dakar, citizens had filled community centers, social platforms, and city squares to discuss what South Africa's defiance meant. Commentators described it as a spark in the dark, one that illuminated a rising awareness that African states were tired of being lectured while being denied equality on the global stage. In Johannesburg, a group of university students gathered around a projector in a dimly lit residence hall. They watched as international analysts debated South Africa's stand. One student, Zinal, raised her voice above the chatter. Can't you see? For once, we're not reacting, we're shaping the global narrative. And the world isn't ready for an Africa that speaks with confidence. Her friend Tawanda nodded. It's the same story everywhere. African nations are tired of being told who to partner with, how to govern, what to build, or what alliances to avoid. South Africa just said the quiet part out loud. As debates spread across the continent, something else was quietly unfolding in the background. Several African defense ministers initiated encrypted communication channels. Not long after sunrise, one of the most unexpected announcements emerged: an emergency virtual summit of African leaders scheduled for that evening. This was unprecedented, not for crisis mediation, but for strategic realignment. When the summit began, the South African president spoke first. "Colleagues, brothers, sisters, the time has come to stop apologizing for wanting sovereignty. Africa has resources the world cannot live without, and yet we are treated as if we are the ones dependent. Those days are over. This is a moment of clarity, not confrontation." The Nigerian representative chimed in. "The global reaction has shown us exactly how much power we hold. Look at how quickly markets shifted just because South Africa said no." The Ethiopian delegate added, "They believed we were divided. They believed pressure on one of us would frighten all of us. But Africa is not shaking. Africa is stabilizing." One of the final voices to speak was from a nation rarely in the spotlight. The minister simply said, "Let the world adjust. We already have." Hours later, an unexpected twist rippled across international media. A leaked report from inside Washington suggested that senior officials were rattled not by South Africa's words, but by what they symbolized: the beginning of a unified African geopolitical identity. In Pretoria, the president received the leak with thoughtful silence. "They fear what Africa could become," the president whispered to an aide. "Good. Let fear inspire respect." That evening, Pretoria's skies glowed with the orange light of sunset. The city felt different. The continent felt different. Africa was no longer a chessboard for others to play on. It was becoming a player. The global system, rigid for decades, had felt its first major tremor from a continent long underestimated. South Africa hadn't just defied pressure. It had awakened something older, bolder, and bigger than any single nation. Africa had begun to rise. And this time, the world was watching with shock, uncertainty, and an emerging realization: nothing would ever be the same again.